Humankind is produced in association with WGBH Boston and supported by the Humankind Program Fund and a grant from the Henry Luce Foundation.
We're on a trajectory, which is obviously not good. We're on a trajectory toward climate catastrophe and toward sort of a racial and economic apartheid. That's kind of where we're heading, unless we intervene. Now, I actually think we are, as a species, very capable of rewiring ourselves. I've seen it in myself, I've seen it in other people.
A child of privilege warns about unsustainable income inequality and how it feeds racial resentment. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. Chuck Collins, living in the working-class Boston neighborhood of Jamaica Plain, has spent a good deal of his life pondering the problems of rich and poor. Chuck's recent memoir, Born on Third Base, relates his story of growing up in an affluent family and being raised in the wealthy Detroit suburb of Bloomfield Hills, home to many executives of the auto industry.
My great-grandfather was a meatpacker, Oscar Mayer, a German immigrant. Opened a butcher shop in Chicago in 1886. The next generation grew it to become an even bigger company with a very successful jingle and brand and marketing, and the next generation took it to... By the time I came along, the company had actually, by the time I was 21, the company sold to General Foods. So it was no longer a family business as I came of age, but the fact of our connection to that meant that there's a fair amount of wealth that flowed down to my generation.
Now, you've said that being raised in great wealth sometimes creates a kind of narcotic of privilege. Can you describe that?
Yeah, I think one of the things wealth does is it's sort of a disconnection drug. It kind of keeps you apart from others. I grew up, not really knowing the struggles that most people experienced. And then over time, as I became kind of painfully aware of the inequalities, one of the ways I think you can cope with it is just to sort of numb out or disconnect or stay in sort of a bubble of privilege. Because I think to live in a society with extreme inequality and to be sort of open-hearted to that is hard.
But Chuck decided to become an activist. He coordinated a coalition of hundreds of organizations in Massachusetts concerned about affordable housing and maintaining a safety net for people who are vulnerable. He's lobbied to raise the minimum wage and promote greater fairness in our tax system. Back when Chuck was fresh out of college, he got a taste of how people live at the margins.
I got a job working with tenants who are trying to buy their apartment buildings and buy their mobile home parks. And that's where I really kind of had this very front row seat to how is it that these inequalities that were opening up in the 80s and 90s were really sort of affecting people in a very pocketbook way. And at the same time, I'm from this wealthy family and I'm surrounded by people with enormous wealth. So I also had a front row seat to wealth multiplying at the top. Just people saying, oh, my house just tripled in value and I just bought another property. And so I was sort of watching this sort of parallel trend of stagnant wages and growing wealth and how it was playing out in people's lives.
And that troubled you?
Yeah, I first of all, I had wealth that had been given to me at the age of 21, and it sort of doubled in about a 4-year period, and through no effort of my own, no great investment savviness or labor on my own. So I just, on some level, I guess I felt like that's sort of wrong that I should have so much and that it should be doubling. And these people that I'm working with are struggling and taking on a second job and going into debt and just trying to hold it together. And that it was clear, really, the myth about deservedness didn't work for me. The story that, oh, your family worked harder, worked smarter, whatever, and these people didn't work as hard. The sort of dominant myth that holds these inequalities in place just didn't work for me. So it troubled me.
And that class divide in America feels like it has only intensified. This was on graphic display in the bruising, brutal presidential election campaign that pitted Hillary Clinton against Donald Trump. It elicited anger and fear on both sides. President Barack Obama in the final year of his presidency.
The one thing that gnaws on me is the degree of continued polarization. This has gotten worse over the last several years. And I think that in those early months, my expectation is that we could pull the parties together a little more effectively.
A polarized politics is a reflection of a polarized economy.
Chuck Collins.
And actually, we've been here before. During times of great inequality and insecurity, the United States has gone both progressive populist, so you think of the prairie fire populists of the late 1800s and 1900, pressing for populist reforms, the income tax. But it also goes regressive populist, anti-immigrant, anti-newcomers, the rise of the KKK. So, we're in one of those moments where we're so polarized economically, and it plays out in different ways. People go different ways with that. So that's just one thing. But I think that we're also, one of the huge challenges is we are living in this ecologically constrained world. So if we want to reduce inequality, we can't really use the same playbook that we used after World War II, although there's still a lot we can learn from the extract, burn, consume, get the kind of economy going, economic growth engine going. We don't sort of have the ecological ability to do that now. We just can't extract and burn without any consequences anymore. So that's clearly one of the challenges of this moment.
So what are some better ways to discuss these challenges? Because the polarization clearly is making things worse.
These inequalities are underlying the racial wealth divide and the polarization there, and the experience that white working class people are feeling as they say, look, we've been left behind, we've been betrayed by this economy. There's one story which I think is the sort of the scapegoating story. That the insecurity that you're experiencing is a result of new immigrants and people cutting in line in front of you, and sort of a sense of unfairness. And I would just say that what we're living through are deeply systemic changes, and that these inequalities are undermining the quality of life for everybody. They're clearly affecting people of color in a very adverse way. They're affecting white working class folks in rural communities and small towns. But I would argue where we're going is actually bad for even the wealthy, that these inequalities undermine the quality of life for all of us.
What role does the human trait of empathy play in allowing this conversation to move forward? Because it feels to me like it's quite stuck.
I think it's a huge challenge right now. And Davey, you mentioned the anger and fear that people feel. It's understandable, and it makes it hard for us to scale the empathy wall to understand what the experiences of other people are. So I'm encouraging wealthy people to sort of bring their full open-heartedness to the struggles in our communities. But I also echo the sociologist Arlie Hochschild, who wrote this fabulous book called Strangers in Their Own Land, sort of about people who are Tea Party members, supporters of Trump. What was their lived experience that brought them to that point? And she tells this deep story that, people feel like they're waiting in a line. The line isn't moving. People are cutting in line in front of them. The liberals, the coastal liberals, are sort of laughing at them, encouraging other people to cut in line. Donald Trump comes along and says, look, I see you out there standing in that line. And these folks feel like people on the eastern coasts are looking down on them, think they're racists, that they're, and one of them said to me, look, I'm not a racist. I actually work and live closer to people of color on a day-to-day basis than many of northern liberals who call me a racist. I just don't like it when people cut in line. So they've really believed that story that people have cut in line unfairly. and think about how you feel when you get cut in line, So that's an interesting empathetic thing, which is, let's understand that people feel like they've been waiting and they've been left behind and they feel somewhat betrayed by, the liberal elites, the Democratic Party, whoever. Now, so what does that mean? I think we have to get the line moving again. We have to learn each other's stories. Meg Wheatley said, you can't hate anybody when you know their story. And because we're more residentially disconnected from each other, the more we have to sort of proactively learn each other's stories.
But a cloud hangs over attempts to promote greater understanding and harmony in America: the presence of bigotry. It's been with us from the beginning, when the first states were half slaveholding and half free. And over the course of American history, prejudice has sometimes softened and sometimes hardened, but never yet dissolved.
That strain of racism is our original sin. It is just wired into everything we do. It is part of the way in which working class whites and people of color have historically been pitted against each other. I mean, the politics of scapegoating, and it's true of anti-Semitism, or, it's the oldest story in the book. There's economic insecurity, there's a powerful group of people who benefit from that, and they deflect the resentment toward more vulnerable people. So those people of color over there, they're the ones who are cutting in line. It's not that we're changing the tax code or funneling wealth to the top or rigging the rules of the economy to help the wealthy get more wealthy. It's those people of color in there. They're the ones who cut in line. They're the ones who took your job. It's the Mexicans. It's the trade agreements who are causing your suffering. And that politics of deflection is, unfortunately very, very powerful, and it plays on the sort of culture of white advantage that we live with.
And it's a very well-worn path in American history.
It's very well-worn, and and again, I go back 100 years ago. I think in times of great inequality, that festers even more, similar to anti-Semitism. It was always in times of economic transition and insecurity when anti-Semitism historically rose up, and Jews were sort of focused on as the scapegoats. And I think it's in the U.S. context, it's often people of color and new immigrants who are the sort of deflection point.
Although there are echoes of the anti-Semitism as we speak in the current political climate.
Yeah, it's part of the past. So here it is, it's a resurgence. In times of greater equality, it goes underground. I mean, it's still there. It's sort of part of, but the resentments get stoked in these times of economic insecurity and transition and upheaval. And, I think that one way I think about it, though, is that as a white person, there's something we can all immediately do, which is just start to understand all the advantages that come. And this isn't true for everybody. I mean, if somebody's feeling economically deprived, but for many people, say in the top half of the income ladder who are white, there's ways in which white advantage is part of our biography. It's part of our history.
Not necessarily being born on third base, but maybe second base.
Yeah, or first base, or just that little lead off of home plate or something. I don't know. But, and I tell the story of, after World War II, we spent a lot of money as a society to build a white middle class, through first-time home buyer, first Veterans Administration loans. One of my uncles got a loan, 1% 40-year fixed-rate VA mortgage. You could buy a lot of house with that today. You could stretch your money. That was a huge subsidy that helped build a white middle class. So a lot of white people got on the express train to wealth building. And a lot of people of color were sort of left behind for the train that never showed up. And that past shows up today in the present because our home ownership rates are, whites have a 71% home ownership rate and blacks have a 41% home ownership rate. That 30% gap has been kind of constant for decades.
We're talking with Chuck Collins, author of Born on First Base and founder of United for a Fair Economy. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. For more information on this segment, The Common Good, and to obtain or download an audio copy, please visit humanmedia.org. For Chuck Collins, his long quest for a society with a more level playing field is not just about politics. It's primarily about human beings making a connection with each other.
When I was growing up in a wealthy family, there wasn't a lot of interdependence. We have to rely on anybody. That's part of the sort of having money sort of means you don't actually ask other people for help. I don't ask my friend Bill to help me fix my car. I go to the car mechanic. I pay for services, but I don't sort of have an exchange community is actually built on mutuality, not on employees. It's built on showing up with your own needs and your own vulnerability and saying, here, I can help you with that, and you can help me with this. And that is the bonds that most working class communities and have to enable people to survive. People are constantly sort of helping each other. I had the experience working with this mobile home park where at the age of 26 and seeing this 30 mobile home park residents kind of put everything they had together on the table to help each other buy the park in a way, an experience of solidarity that I had never seen growing up. And I thought, I want some of that.
A solidarity of need and mutual assistance.
Exactly. Then, not the stiff arm of charity distanced, but the actual mutuality. And, our mutual aid muscles are incredibly out of shape for the most part. Particularly as people live into this sort of experience of economic independence. I don't need anybody. I'm economically independent. And then all of a sudden you lose a job or you have a health issue or all of a sudden you need people and there isn't a web there. There isn't like people that are in the habit of helping each other. And that's kind of one of the missing things. And I think that's one of the ways in which privilege disconnects people from each other.
And there's a certain sadness in that.
They're alone, and I think that's not how we're wired to be. I think we're really meant to be much more in sort of small extended family units and tribal units and just kind of in a kind of community of mutuality.
There's strength in numbers.
Yeah. And I have that experience, just in my own local religious congregation. I remember after the economic meltdown in 2008, I don't know, that October, a lot of us felt like, oh my God, the sands are shifting. There's this sort of economic insecurity. So I think some people are feeling that today. Will I have my job in 3 months? And as a congregation, we had never really we'd shared our, our spiritual lives, but we had never really had a conversation about our economic circumstances. And we just started to have these sort of circles, these conversations with each other. And it was like powerful. And then we started to realize, hey, we could help each other. Like we have things that each other needs. And I think it really wound people together in a more powerful way.
Like what kinds of things that each other needs?
Well, you can help me think about starting this business that I've always wanted to start. We formed what we call a resilience circle, but it's just a group of people who commit to talk to each other and really share. And people came in with their budgets and said, I'm not making ends meet. Can you help me think about how to cut my costs or increase my income? Or people had a business idea. How can you help them network to do that? Some people just had chores and things that they needed help with that they couldn't afford to pay, so we could barter with each other. I'll rake your leaves and you can watch my kids. And, so I think we just had been out of practice of looking to one another to help us meet our most basic needs and not having to go into the marketplace and pay money for things that we couldn't afford anymore. So it was a moment where we saw that how much we actually had. It was an abundance moment. Like, wow, look what we have together.
There's a movement afoot, it's now really worldwide, to cultivate an economy that sustains our communities, as opposed to an extractive economy that drains our communities. And I know that you've been very committed to that.
Yeah, I mean, as my own understanding of both the economic and ecological moment we're in grew, I noticed this global transition movement, which is it's community, people at the local level asking the question, how can we build a local, healthy, resilient economy in the face of the changing economy and the changing energy situation? And so people who are looking at local food systems, producing energy, reducing energy consumption, building these kind of mutual aid networks, barter exchanges, local businesses that are rooted in a community that are meeting real goods and, the needs for local services and goods. In the neighborhood I live in, which is just one neighborhood of which there are, I think I looked, there are 120 of these transition communities in the United States, several thousand globally, that is looking at, we have a business incubator for kind of new economy businesses, food businesses, services. People are creating livelihoods in the economy of the future. So I think that's where, and part of what I'm saying to people who have wealth is, take your money out of the Wall Street stock market, put it into this new emerging, vibrant local economy, which will meet your needs and build up this kind of economic resilience that we're going to need to ride out the coming years.
And while the grassroots activists of the transition movement hope for changes in public policy to promote sustainability, they look beyond the bitterly divided federal government.
Certainly cities and states can be major players. We could be creating state enterprise banks that invest in these new economy ventures. There are lots of locally controlled banks. And in the neighborhood where I live, we've gotten people to move their deposits to two of these local banks that are the most committed to lending to these local businesses. So it's a way that you're leveraging your insured deposits in a bank in a way that helps build this new economy at the local level. As a consumer, you can have a big impact. I mean, we have a local first, 110 local businesses. You spend $1 in one of those businesses, it circulates, it stays in the community. Spend $1 in a business that's owned from the outside, it leaves the neighborhood. So people being aware of how they're spending, consumption, banking, looking at all the ways in which they can personally leverage to support this new economy, I think is one powerful thing.
And that requires an attention to detail, a willingness to think through choices rather than just default to the way things have always been done. Those are some pretty big leaps for a lot of people, especially feeling busy the way many of us do.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is people are kind of making it a little bit more user-friendly, I think. You want to support your local economy? Here, a lot of the local first groups put out directories of businesses. They provide coupons or currencies that can be used within those businesses. So you start to sort of root your consumption in a slightly different way. But I think part of it is intention, is bringing an intention to this, to each of our choices that we make. It sounds like a potentially burdensome moral activity, but actually it can be quite joyful, the power of living with intention.
And the disadvantages of living without intention can be quite devastating.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways you could be investing and consuming in a way that undermines your own economic security.
In recent years, Chuck Collins worked at bridge building between people of means and those less fortunate. He seeks to erode barriers and silos that reinforce a sense that the rich are more deserving than the poor. And he's found a surprising number of allies, sometimes among the super wealthy, who feel a moral duty to support the greater good.
The best way I found to sort of break those narratives, if you will, or disrupt that narrative of individual achievement is by meeting all these successful business leaders, multimillionaires, Bill Gates' dad, and entrepreneurs who tell the story of their own success through the lens of how they got help. So they'll say, I worked hard and I brought my individual gifts to this, and I'm not denying that as an individual it made a difference, but look at the public investments that I took advantage. Look at the commonwealth of the fertile ground that we created together through public investment in research and the infrastructure for transportation and the internet and the knowledge infrastructure we built. Look at this commonwealth around us that made my own individual business and wealth creation possible. And these are people who tell their stories through that. So I find that very, very refreshing. And one guy, this guy Martin Rothenberg, I remember hearing him stand up and say, I grew up in a poor family that had no money, and yet I went to this great school and this library that was open on the weekends, and there was this librarian who took an interest in me, and then I went to college and I got a free college tuition. Someone else paid for me to go to college. And he goes on and talks about all the things that helped him and says, I sold my company for $30 million. Don't I have some kind of responsibility to pay back a portion of that so that some other kid out there that isn't born with a lot of advantages can have the same opportunities I have?
Chuck Collins, author of Born on Third Base and founder of United for a Fair Economy. Listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. Studio recording by Doug Sugards. Editorial assistance from David Cruz, Ken Rogers, Kathy Graham, and Mark Kilstein. Webmaster Brian K. Johnson. Special thanks to Tony Buck. Our program is presented by Human Media in association with Connie Goldman Productions. Program development provided by Shart Media.
To purchase a CD copy of this program, please call 1-800-5LISTEN. That's 1-800-5LISTEN. Or visit our website, where you can also obtain an audio download of this and our other programs and can hear selected episodes free. You can access free written materials related to this program as well. Our web address is humanmedia.org. Again, if you'd like to purchase a CD copy of Humankind by phone, please call 1-800-5LISTEN, and our web address is humanmedia.org.
And you can subscribe at iTunes to our free weekly podcast, Humankind on Public Radio. This segment, The Common Good, is Humankind program number 251.
The executive producer is David Freudberg. This is Humankind.